Welcome to the From My Stand podcast with Matt Hinkle. Whether you are an avid hunter, a novice, or someone interested in the sport, Matt has a unique perspective to share. Sit back, relax, and kick your boots up as Matt shares what he's seeing from his stand.
Hi, friends. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a exciting episode for you today that's going to really launch a series of episodes that I've been super excited to get to. Today, we're going to start talking about off-season scouting. So last week's episode, which started season 2, we said that next season starts right now. But what does that mean? What should we be doing? Well, in that episode, I told you that one of the most important things to do in the off-season is to be diligent in your scouting. And so today we're going to start to talk about what that looks like and what you can be doing in that. I can't teach what I don't know, and I can't teach what I don't do. So what I thought I would do is take this and the next couple of episodes and just kind of go over what my system of off-season scouting looks like. And there may be other people that do it differently, and I'm not even saying they're wrong, but I do want to kind of go over what I do, what I think you ought to do in getting ready for next year in your scouting. Someone once said that if you spend more time scouting than you do hunting, you're always going to get deer. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. If you think about a sports team, they spend a lot more time on the practice field or on the practice court than they actually do out playing the games. And that's kind of what the relationship between scouting and hunting is like. So we're going to dive right into it today and begin talking about it. We won't get it all in this episode. I'm going to spend some time right here at the table talking to you and kind of talking you through the system that I use and my approach to scouting. And then some of this is going to be out in the field. We're going to show some real live scouting episodes out in the field, and hopefully that'll be something that can be beneficial to all of us. So again, thanks for joining us. Let's dive right into it. So when I approach off-season scouting for deer, and what I want to do is I don't want to take anything for granted. I want to start at a basic level. And so if you're a seasoned or mature hunter, some of this might be a little bit elementary for you. It might be a little bit basic, but I'm trying to think of the guy or the lady that's never done this. And so I don't want to take anything for granted. We're going to kind of go at this from a pretty basic standpoint. Not that it will all be basic, but I'm going to kind of start right at the beginning. And I'm going to talk about the ground that we're scouting as though we've never been there. So as I describe things, I want you to think of it as like seeing that ground for the very first time, because some of these steps and some of what I'm talking about won't really apply if it's a very, very familiar piece of ground to you. If it's a place that you just hunt year after year after year, you won't necessarily have to go through all of these steps every single time. And so I'm going to just kind of pretend like we are looking at a situation brand new for the first time, and you've never been there, never seen it. So when I go to a piece of property and I'm going to hunt it, whether it is public land or private land, doesn't matter. This system applies to every situation, to every circumstance. Whether it is big timber, big open timber, whether it's a mixture of timber and clear cuts, whether it is hill country or flat country, farmland, whatever the case is, I always approach a piece of property basically the same way. And also, by the way, when you're doing your scouting, don't forget that knowing what's going on the adjacent properties is important too. Now, I'm not suggesting that you trespass. If you don't have permission to be there, you need to stay out. But sometimes the property that you're hunting won't have every one of these ingredients. But that doesn't mean that you can't use maps and public information to try to figure out what's going on the other properties. Okay. Deer do not understand property boundaries. If they see a fence, they jump over it. If they see a road, they cross it. And so deer don't really pay attention. They're not going to necessarily play by all the rules and do everything they're supposed to do on your property. And so here's what scouting is. Okay. Let's just define the term before we go any further. Scouting is trying to figure out what the world of the deer that you're hunting is like. What is their world like? What do they do and when do they do it? Because in deer hunting, now there's lots of different, there's bear hunting, elk hunting, moose hunting, pronghorn hunting, sheep, goat. There's all different types of species, and there's different methodology. There's different hunting methods for different species, but we're talking about like stand hunting for whitetail deer. And the name of the game with stand hunting for whitetail deer is figuring out where those deer are going to be and when, and how you can be there before they get there. You can be there waiting on them when they show up. That's the name of the game with stand hunting. In order to do that successfully, you got to do some scouting and try to figure out what their world is like. Where are they and when are they there, so you can be there first. So that's what we're trying to do. When I go onto a piece of property, let me just give you the key ingredients that I'm looking for, and then we'll talk about them. And I'm even going to show you some footage of what it looks like out in the field, okay? The first thing I do when I'm scouting is I try to identify the deer's cover, the deer's cover. I call it cover. It goes by a lot of different names. Some people would call it their security area. Some people would call it their bedding area. Sometimes you'll hear hunters talk about the buck's bedroom. And all those different terms, what they're talking about is where that deer feels safe, where that deer feels secure. I call it cover. And that just covers everything that we mean by that. It means where they bed, where they find their security, and what the reason it's so important to identify a deer's cover is because that is where they're going to spend most of their time in daylight hours. In daylight hours, most of their life in daylight hours, they are a prey animal. They are under constant threat from predators. And so they're going to spend most of their daylight hours in cover. Now, I am not arguing that you should hunt right in their cover. In fact, I would tend to think you probably shouldn't hunt right in their most secure places, because then you'll turn their security into something that isn't security anymore. So you got to be careful about that. But it is important to know where their cover is. And I really think that it is like step one. When you're trying to piece the world of that white-tailed deer together, the first thing you want to identify is where their cover is. Now, I keep a file. I keep a scouting file handy. This is my journal, and it just kind of looks like this. Show you a couple of pages. I'm showing it to you upside down, but I keep a journal of everything that I find scouting, and I think that's a really good idea. But also in this file, I've got maps. Okay, I've just got topo maps. I've got blown up portions. I've got aerial photos. And so, all of that I think is pretty important. You would be surprised how much scouting you can do from your couch at home. If you get satellite pictures or topo maps or aerial photos, just whatever you can get your hands on, you can identify certain things that you'll be looking for without putting in all the legwork. It saves a ton of time, and for a lot of people, it's hard to find time to get out scouting. So now, I'm a big believer that whatever you think you found on a map, you need to go and verify in the off season on foot. But maps will save you a lot of time and a lot of miles on your boots if you start there. But when I begin to scout an area, I want to find where their cover is, where where their sense of security. Now, let me tell you the other things I try to identify. Try to identify their cover. That's where they're going to spend their days. And when there's any kind of pressure or any kind of danger, that's where they're going to escape to. Okay. And it's important to know where those areas are. And we're going to talk about what cover looks like in just a minute. The second thing you're going to want to identify is where they're feeding, where they're feeding. If it's in farmland, it's probably going to be agricultural fields. And by the way, going forward in this video series, I'm probably just going to use the shortened term ag. When you hear me say ag, I mean agricultural fields. Right here in our part of the country, it's going to be cornfields and soybean fields primarily. But agricultural or ag is where a lot of deer in this part of the country feed. If you're hunting in big woods, hardwoods, it's going to be acorns is going to be a big thing that they're going to feed on. So you're going to want to figure out what they're feeding on. So the top two things to identify in your scouting is where's their cover and where's their food source. And I would add the food source water. Water is a really important thing as well. Okay, so food, water, cover, and then a third thing. So you got cover, you got food and water. Then the third thing, you would have their transition trails linking those two places. Deer will a lot of times follow the same trails out of their bedding area into their feeding area, and then out of their feeding area into their bedding area. And most of the time, a good strategy for deer hunters is to try to intercept them somewhere on that trail. So you want to find their trails that are linking those two vital parts of their world together. Then a fourth thing that you want to identify is how you're going to access where you're going to hunt. You know, ultimately, you're looking for a place to hunt. You're looking for an exact spot to put a blind. You're looking for an exact tree to hang a stand. And that all is a part of scouting. You know, you're trying to figure out where exactly should I put that stand or that blind. But then don't forget, you've got to figure out how you're going to access it. So there's four things I try to figure out when I'm scouting. Where they're bedding or where their cover is, where their security, that's one. Where they're feeding, that's two. Pinpoint their trails that they're using to go back and forth from those two areas, that's three. And then where am I going to park my car? How am I going to walk in? Wind direction, parking lots, things like that, approach. That's the fourth thing. Those are the four big questions that I try to answer in my scouting. But I always start with cover. Where are the deer finding their security? Where are they bedding? And where are they spending most of their time in daylight hours? Not that I'm going to go charging into those areas and hunt them, hang a stand there, or put a blind there. But I need to know where they are, because if I don't know that, I don't know the first thing about the deer that I'm hunting. I don't know the property really that well that I'm hunting. So I've got to figure that out. All right, so what are characteristics of deer's security areas? What kind of things are we looking for? Number one, the first thing I look for when I'm scouting, I want to know where all the thickets are. All the thickets. Most properties have at least one thicket. There might be more than one thicket, but I want to know where every thicket on the property is. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take, let me see, I don't really want to show you that one here. I'll show you this one. Okay, this is an aerial photo of a place that I'm actually not hunting. I don't even hunt in this county, but this aerial photo does a pretty good job of illustrating what we're talking about. Here's an agricultural field. Now there is a road there, but it's a country road. It's not very busy. And this just happens to be woods, but in this part right around here, it's a very, very thick, dense thicket right there. And so what I would do if if this were my map of my hunting area, I would say, okay, there's a thicket right there, and I would circle it. There is a thicket. Now, I am not arguing that thickets are automatically where the deer are bedding. That's not necessarily true. There's other factors that come into play when it comes to a deer's bedding area. But thickets are a great place to start. A lot of times they do bed in thickets, and they do spend their days and thickets, but not always. But it's always a good place to start. Now, I want to show you a quick spot from the field. Okay, I was out scouting on some public land, and I was in a place I had never been before, and I located a thicket, and it was really kind of a swampy, marshy thing. I've never hunted there so far. I've only scouted there, but I got to be honest with you, I'm probably going to be hunting this area next year. I saw a lot of things there that I really liked, but it's going to show you, that I'm in a place I've never been before. I'm seeing it for the very first time. And what am I looking for? I'm looking for the most difficult, hardest thicket to get through. I mean, it was a thicket you could hardly walk through. And that's the kind of stuff you want to look for because think about it. We as the hunter, we're the predator. The deer, they're the prey. Um, what attracts deer often repels humans, and what repels deer often attracts humans. There's a reason on public land why a lot of people wind up hunting in the same place because it's a place that attracts people. It's easy to get to, or it's pretty, or there's something about they like. But really, deer find safety and security in some of the thickest, most tangled up places. I mean, they can be like jungles that you can barely get through. But deer are attracted to those kind of places because they feel safe and secure. So let's go to the field. Let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. And then we'll talk about the second type of terrain feature that deer find security in. There's all kinds of terrain features that deer feel safe and secure in. I'd say number one, thickets. After that, after you see this, we'll talk about the next one.
All right, well, I'm just out doing some postseason scouting. So, I told you in our planning video where you kind of plan your hunting season, I told you I had a couple of areas picked out on public land to try out next year. But, I basically located those places on a map. A couple different factors went into figuring out where I'd go. But I am on public land. Anybody can hunt here. So what I have located here is what I believe to be a trail connecting bedding to feeding. Again, I say all the time, that's the kind of stuff you want to find. Well, I have basically located a trail that's running a straight line pretty much. And I mean, this is a thick area. I'm going to turn the camera around so you can see what I'm seeing. I'm kind of in a swamp. I mean, you can see that I'm in water. I'm in kind of standing water here. But that's where I just came through now. That is dense thickets. I believe that's where the deer are hiding. I think they're probably finding security in there. They're probably bedding somewhere in all this mess. I haven't located any beds, but they're probably bedding somewhere in this. I'm a big believer when you're scouting a new area, and that's what I'm doing today. I have never set foot in where I'm at today. I located this on a map. It's public land. I can be here. So this is going to be one of my early places I try, I think, because I'm liking what I see here. But when you're scouting a new area, here's basically what I think you ought to do. Number one, locate the thickest area on that property, because that's where the deer are going to find their security. And so that's where I started today. I went into this you can't hardly walk through this stuff. It's so rough. And then from there, you figure out, well, where's natural place that the deer will be feeding? Well, I did that on a map. There are cornfields west of where I'm at. Okay. So to show you what I'm looking at, I'll turn the camera around. That is west, and another couple hundred yards, you would cross a main road and there's cornfields. That's no doubt where the deer have got to be feeding, or where they'll be feeding next year in the early season, because corn will be up. Well, on this trail, and this is basically a vertical trail, I mean, I've been following it, it's running a straight line, but look what I just found. It might be kind of hard to see in the camera, but there's a pretty good rub. That's a pretty decent buck rub. And you can see the trail, you know, and then it kind of goes that way. So what I believe is happening here is there's a buck. If he wasn't killed this year, and that's a possibility because this is public land, but there's a buck that's getting his security and all this stuff. And he's also feeding probably at night in that cornfield. So, you know, this is an area I'm going to keep tabs on. I'm going to come over here this summer and kind of watch the fields at night, see where they're coming in, going out. Now, I can't hunt the fields. That's private land, and I don't have permission there. And I just, you know, I doubt I'll get permission, but I'm not even going to try to get permission. I'm just going to hunt the public. But, you know, I believe what's going on here is these deer are finding security on public land, food on private land, and then you just, you know, they're feeding no doubt at night. So I'm thinking if you set up somewhere over that direction, you know, the wind would be coming from the field to you. They'd be coming out of those fields in the morning, coming into this security for the day. I'm just thinking you could catch one. You might be able to catch one in the evening coming out to the fields early in the season before all the pressure gets here. But that is the westerly way. And so that means the wind's going to be coming this way into the security. So if he's going to hunt it in the evening, you'd have to hunt it on a day with absolutely no wind, or on a day when there was like a south, north, or east wind. But you could not hunt this in the evening on a west wind. But anyway, I'm just trying to show you guys videos of scouting. This is how you do it, or this is how I do it anyway. And I'm probably doing some of it right and some of it wrong. But anyway, I just wanted to show you what I was finding. It's public land. Anybody can come here. Anybody can do what I'm doing. Don't get discouraged. Don't give up. Find you a deer and hunt them. Okay, so let's review what we've said so far. So when it comes to scouting for deer, the first thing we're looking for on any given piece of property is cover, which means security. Where does that deer feel safe? Where does he feel like he can go and spend his daylight hours without being bothered? Well, the first characteristic of cover is thickets. And so I showed you an example of being out on a new piece of property, and the first thing I wanted to know is where's the thickest, most jungle-like terrain on that property, because that's a good place to bet that those deer are going to for safety and security. But there's another type of terrain. There's another terrain feature that also makes deer feel secure, and that is high ground. High ground. If you're wanting to find where deer are bedding and where they're spending their time in daylight hours, you need to be aware of and make yourself familiar with any high ground. Now, some properties aren't going to have any high ground. Some properties are flat. This example that I showed you, where we circled the thicket there, that's flat property. You know, there's just not a whole lot there in the way of high ground. But I mean, this is very rational and very logical and very sound if you think about it. Deer like to be on high ground because it makes them feel safe. It makes them feel like danger has to come from below, and they'll be able to look down on whatever's coming to them, and so they really like high ground. So what you'll have to do, if your property has both thickets and high ground, then you're just going to have to get out there and scout and figure out what they are using, because they'll use both. They'll use thickets and they'll use high ground. And you'll just have to kind of figure out
where they happen to be on the property that you're hunting and the situation that you are in. But I'll tell you this, it doesn't mean that deer will bed or move and walk on the top of a hill. Deer oftentimes won't walk along the top of a ridge or bed on the top of a ridge because they don't want to be skylined. But they'll come just below the top, just below the crest. They'll move and they'll bed, but they really like high ground. It's a kind of a defendable position for them. So deer like the high ground. Now I've got in my journal here a couple different examples of different types of high ground that deer like. Deer, I have found my experience has been that deer like points, okay? So if I'm, trying to figure out where deer might be bedding, I'll get on that topo map or get out on the ground, and actually walk it and look. But I'll try to identify points. Now, a point is where a ridge kind of terminates and kind of points down a long holler. I've got an example of one here in my journal. This is the end of a ridge. This is the top. It goes down to the bottom. Now, I know these are some, I would call these kind of like sub points or secondary points. But this one here, you can't see it because I don't have the full blown up picture of the valley. But this valley extends way down. So these are not really pointing in a straight line down the long valley, but this one is. And a lot of times deer will bed somewhere just below the bottom of that point, and then they'll come down off the point and walk that flat valley out into wherever they're feeding. Now, a lot of times they do that at night, but points are really good high ground terrain features to look for. And I've got some video footage coming up where I'm going to show you some live scouting out on a point. Also, another type of high ground to look for are knobs. Knobs are just when a hill comes up out of flat ground all around. I'm at a flat table, okay? And if you could just imagine right in the middle of the table, a bit of high ground. It's not really connected to any other high ground. It's not really a ridge. It's just kind of a knob that raises up out of nowhere. And those can be really good. They can attract deer. I've got a picture of one of those in my journal as well. Another type of high ground to look for are hubs. Hubs are when a series of ridges come together like spokes on a wheel and they meet in one central high ground. Sometimes those hubs, and I've got a picture in my journal of what a hub looks like. There's some high ground, and then you can see my pencil marks going out in all the different directions. It's just a series of ridges that come together. But high ground, and again, don't forget, I'm not arguing that you should hunt the high ground. I'm not saying you should slap your stand up there where they're bedding on the point or where they're bedding up on a knob or a hub or something like that. I'm not suggesting that you hunt right there. But what I'm saying is when you're scouting and trying to figure out how the deer live, just realize that they will gravitate to thickets for security and cover, and they will gravitate to high ground. Let's go out into the field. Let me show you an example of some high ground that I scouted, and I found all kinds of beds. You're going to see it right in the footage, and it's a really good example of deer using high ground for security.
All right, well, I'm doing a little late season scouting. As you can see, I don't have a bow or a gun or anything on me. I'm just scouting. I'm on a huge tract of public land. This area is about 10,000 acres. It's pretty big country. The place I'm at, I located it on a topo map. That's how I kind of found this ridge. And I'm going to turn the camera around and show you a few things. You can see how I'm walking right along the top of a ridge. It falls off to both sides. You can kind of see how it crowns. Well, I'm just walking this ridge. You can see my footprints right there. There's a lot of deer sign up here. That is north. The direction the camera's facing is north. you got a steep fall off. That's the west, and that's the east. And this ridge is going to terminate right up here at a big point. And things like that are usually really good for deer. What they will do, what a deer will do, is they will bed on the sides of these ridges. Now this is the east facing side that's slightly angled to the south. This is going to be the sunnier side. They would be more likely to bed on this side in late season. They'd be more likely to bed on this side in early season. I would not hunt up high if I were, and I may hunt here next year. I'm thinking about hunting here early in the season. But, and by the way, this is a very difficult area to access, and I've already seen one deer naturally. He didn't know I was there. I had the wind in my favor. And I saw another deer. I jumped it out of its bed. I would hunt down low. I would find a wind favorable way to access it. And that's what I'm looking for today. That's my mission today. I'm trying to, because out in that bottom, there's a creek. And when I say a creek, it's like a big creek. You need hip waders to cross it. There's a road way over there. And what I'm trying to do is come in over there with the wind, coming across this way. I have a feeling they're bedding up here and they're feeding down there. I want to hunt down in the low early in the season and try to kill a public land buck here. But here's what I really want you to see. I had a suspicion that deer were bedding up here. Well, I was right. There's a bed. There's a bed. There's a bed. There's a bed. By the way, there's tracks everywhere. I mean, look, I'm just following a pretty heavy game trail. There's deer droppings. Now, they aren't fresh, but they're there. So, I'm talking about scouting in today's episode. I'm doing a little bit of a mashup. I'm putting several scouting encounters together in this video. But I wanted you to see real live in-field scouting. This is how we do it. Look, there's more droppings. Now here's where that ridge terminates at a big point. Now this is the south side. I bet you I'm going to find some beds down through here as I walk. But I'm going to have to turn the camera off here in just a second and start concentrating. But if I find anything else really good, I'll get the camera back on and show you. But this is where that ridge terminates. It falls off. There's a creek, maybe even call it a river. I don't know, about 300 or 400 yards out. And I'm going to try to find a place to cross it because I don't want to hunt this coming from the way I've come. That would be the wrong approach. I need to approach it from that direction, but I gotta find a way in over there. So that's what you do when you scout. So anyway, hope that this was somewhat helpful. All right, I'll get the camera back up and rolling here when I find something else to show you.
All right, so let's just quickly review what we've seen so far. We're talking about step one in scouting, which is locating cover or a deer security. We've said when you're out there in the field or on your aerial maps, you want to locate thickets, you want to locate high ground. Let me give you one more, and that is what I call boundaries. Boundaries. Now, what I mean by boundaries is if a deer can, he will use a boundary to his advantage. What I mean by a boundary is a place that a deer knows no danger is going to approach him from that direction. And so sometimes a deer will back up to a boundary and allow one of the sides of his security zone to be covered by a boundary. Let me give you an example. Now, I don't have any in the field footage for this one, but let me just try to draw up real quick what I'm talking about. And this is something you can be looking for when you're out scouting. If you imagine, this isn't going to be real, this isn't going to be a realistic picture because it's never this cut and dry. But if you could imagine a deer's security zone as being a four-sided room. Okay, let's just act like this area right here is his security, and it is a perfect four-sided structure, okay? What a deer will do when they can, now they can't always do this, but they will try to get their security in an area where one of those four sides is covered by something that he knows danger is not going to come from, and so it almost doesn't count because a deer has to cover every direction with either his ear, his eyes, or his nose, or a combination of those three. Deer cover all sides with their eyes, their ears, or their nose. And if they can back up to a spot where they don't have to worry about one side, that is a really good situation for them. So let's just imagine that this side is a lake or a river or something that human beings are not going to approach them from, or coyotes or other types of predators. And so you can see what's going on there then. You know, he doesn't have to worry about this side. Nothing's going to come. Now, I guess if you're in the South and you're in alligator country, but up here in Ohio, deer are not used to danger coming from bodies of water. So if they can back up to a body of water, then he doesn't even have to worry about that. All he's got to worry about is something coming from this side, or from down here. Now, I will tell you something deer won't do very often. They won't get themselves in a corner, because they want to have multiple ways of escape. He wants to have more than one way of escape. He wants to be able to escape that way. He wants to be able to escape that way. He wants to be able to escape that way. He wants to be able to escape. So if this lake took a bend and was down here also, you're enjoying my artwork, I'm sure. So let's just say the lake, he's not going to make the corner of the lake his security because that eliminates one of his ways of escape, and he's probably going to feel a little too cornered there. But, boundaries are good things to look for. If you can find some combination of high ground, thicket, and natural boundary, you can almost guarantee that you have found a deer's security. So, all right, this is episode 1 of our series on scouting. That's as far as we're going to go today. But if you're just getting started in scouting and you say, Matt, help me, tell me where to begin, what have we said? Start with their cover. Start with their security. Look for things like thickets. Look for things like high ground. Look for things like boundaries, because when you find those things or some combination, you're going to find where they're bedding, and you're going to find where they're going when the hunting pressure starts, and you're going to find where they're spending the majority of their life in daylight hours. I'm going to say it one more time. I'm not arguing that you should hunt right there in their security, because remember, if you hunt right in their security zone isn't their security zone anymore. So I'm not suggesting that you hunt there, but what I'm suggesting is that you build your strategy around that. When we're all done with this series of scouting episodes, I'm going to show you how to draft up a hunting strategy. This is a map an aerial photo of an area that I'm thinking about hunting, and I don't know if you can see it real good in the camera or not, but I've got it fully marked up, and really an entire hunting strategy is ready to go there. I know where they're feeding, or at least I think. I haven't hunted there yet, but I think I know where they're feeding. I think I know where they're bedding. There's no high ground, but there's thickets, there's a boundary, there's ag fields for them to feed in. I think I know which direction they're moving from evening to morning. I think I know which direction they're moving from morning to evening. and I know where I can park, I know where I can approach, and so I've kind of got a whole strategy devised around that spot. I'm not saying you're going to hunt in their cover, but what I'm saying is you're going to factor in their cover in your strategy, because that's what scouting is. Scouting is trying to devise your strategy to be successful this fall, and you can't really have a sound strategy if you don't know where their cover is. Thanks for joining us in today's episode. I hope it's been helpful to you in some way. My goal for this podcast is real simple. I want to entertain, I want to encourage, and sometimes maybe even educate. Hopefully, this episode today has maybe taught you something about scouting. I really hope it has. We're going to continue on next time. We're going to be talking about locating those feeding areas. I'm really excited about that episode. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I hope you'll join us for that. Hey, if you find this podcast helpful in any way, give us a like, give us a subscribe, turn on your notifications. It will really help us grow the podcast. A lot of people are watching who haven't liked or subscribed yet or followed, and it really helps us out if you could do that. I would really, really appreciate it if you find this helpful. Follow, like, or subscribe, depending on what platform you watch on, and I'm looking so forward to the future of this podcast together with you. Well, I'm your host, Matt Hinkle, and that's how I see it from my stand.